Well, it's good to see you out today. The weather's kind of bad, but not too bad. Appreciate your prayers for my dad. He's been struggling with his health here this week quite a bit, and ask that you'll continue to do that. My brother's here, Jason from St. Louis, and his wife and family. If you're looking at all those kids packed around my boys there, that's their first cousins. And so it's good to have Jason and his family with me today as well. Connie, we're sorry to hear about the passing in your family. We love you and support you during this time. We're going to be studying from the book of John, which we started last Sunday. If you'll turn to John chapter 2 is where we'll study today. John chapter 2. A lot of people think whenever there's a lower crowd that the sermon will be shorter. It's probably not going to happen, so I'm just telling you in advance. John chapter 2. Let's read the chapter and then we'll study it today. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And Jesus was also invited and his disciples to the wedding. And when the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what do I have to do with you? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now there were 6 stone water pots set there for the Jewish custom of purification, contained 20 or 30 gallons each. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water," and they filled them to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now and take it to the head waiter." And they took it to him. And when the head waiter tasted the water which had become wine, and did not know where it had come from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, "Every man serves the good wine first, and when men have drunk freely, then that which is poorer. And you have kept the good wine until now." This beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. And after this he went down to Capernaum, he and his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed a few days. And the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem and found in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers seated. And he made a scourge of cords and drove them out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And to those who were selling the doves he said, "Take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a house of merchandise." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for thy house will consume me." The Jews therefore answered and said, "What sign do you show us, seeing that you do these things?" Jesus answered and said to them, "Destroy this temple, and I will in 3 days raise it up." The Jews therefore said, "It took 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he said this, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had spoken. And now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover during the feast, many believed in his name, beholding his signs which he was doing. But Jesus on his part was not entrusting himself to them, for he knew all men. And because he did not need anyone to bear witness concerning man, for he himself knew what was in man. I like this word that I have here in gold in this verse 11, the word manifested. And I'm going to kind of use that word in the outline for today's lesson. The Holman Christian Standard Version uses the word displayed, and the NIV uses the word revealed. And both of those are great. It kind of help us define what manifested is. I think that a person who seeks to use this passage as a proof text and information on the consumption of wine has really missed the point of the whole the event. The purpose of this event is made very clear to us by John when he says, this is how Jesus manifested or revealed his glory for the first time in this way to his disciples. If we're doing a timeline here, you know Jesus has only been baptized a month prior. This is the beginning of his ministry. He has just called these disciples who have begun to follow him. It's become apparent that something's changed in the life of Jesus. He's gone from the living at home and doing carpentry work and taking care of his mother and his family to now he is beginning something new, which is his ministry, which is his work. And so he now makes manifest, or he reveals his true glory, his true life purpose for being here to the disciples. He displays it to them. So this is going to be the outline then for the lessons today. We'll do the first two this morning and the third one tonight. In verses 1 through 12, at the wedding, he manifests his glory to his disciples for the first time in this first sign or miracle. Then in verses 13 through 22, Jesus manifests his zeal in the temple. And then in the last few verses, verses 23 to 25, the hearts of men are made manifest to Jesus. It's very clear from the end of the chapter that Jesus knows the hearts of men. And although he's revealing himself to the world, we are all revealed to him already because he knows us. He knows our hearts, and he doesn't need the witness or testimony of men because he knows what's in the hearts of all men. A sobering thought for sure. Now, if you'll bear with me, I have quite a few slides here of some historical setting that I want to use with regard to this wedding at Cana. The wedding occurred a little over a month after the baptism of Jesus. Weddings of virgins were held on Wednesdays, a feast that was hosted by the bridegroom. Sometimes both families were involved. Sometimes poor families would shorten the feast. If you can imagine, it would be pretty expensive to try to feed a whole group of people. You know, we think about having a wedding and you have maybe the groom's dinner that you have the night before, or the rehearsal dinner. Imagine if you had to feed all those people for a week and to provide drink for them for a week. It could be pretty costly. So sometimes poor families would shorten the feast. Cana is located only a few miles from Nazareth, the hometown of Jesus and his family. So if we look at this map, I've kind of shown you have the Sea of Galilee. I like this map. It's very simple. It's easy to see. You see the town there of Nazareth then, and then Cana is nearby. So this was a neighboring town, a close-by town. And certainly many of Jesus' family and friends would have lived in the region. Maybe not all of them living in Nazareth, but maybe some of them in some of the surrounding villages and towns. And it's very possible that there are some relatives and even friends that live here in Cana. It appears from looking at verse 12 that Joseph is deceased. If you'll notice there in verse 12 it says, after this he went down to Capernaum, he, his mother, his brothers, and his disciples. There's no mention of Joseph. So many people think that by the time we get to this point, when Jesus is beginning his ministry, that his earthly parent, father, Joseph, is deceased. Family honor was of vital importance. Running out of food would have been a major embarrassment. It would have brought shame upon the family, a great amount of embarrassment to the host family. So if you invited all these guests to come, here they're there, there's an expectation culturally that they're going to be fed and they're going to have plenty to drink. And so they're here for this great feast, and then they're about to run out, and that would have been extremely embarrassing. Now this may be something, but it may not be true, but I did read that some Jewish historians suggest that the events of Cana may have been the Apostle John's wedding, which is why it's unique to this book, which is why it's in this book. John's the only gospel writer to record this event. If true, it would help explain Mary's responsibility as a hostess, her concern over the family honor. Her place as a hostess is further verified by her charge over the wedding servants, which says, go fill the water pots up. She's obviously a hostess at this wedding. If this was indeed John's wedding, Salome, Mary's sister, would have been the groom's mother, John's mother, Salome. Regardless of whether it was John's or not, Mary is certainly a hostess here. Close friend, a distant relative of some kind, and she feels a certain burden of responsibility towards the success of this and saving face for the family and that they wouldn't be embarrassed. Just some other interesting things. I think the term woman used here by Jesus is not used in a derogatory term like we might think of it today. Well, woman, I told you. It is not that sense at all, okay? It was used by Jesus when he spoke from the cross to his mother, or about his mother. Woman, behold thy son. Now, that's the same word. He wouldn't be on the cross speaking in some derogatory term to his mother there in that moment. And so certainly Jesus is not being disrespectful in using that term. It was a respectful term. I read one commentator who said that we might, in our language, the closest we might could come would be the word lady. Lady? You know, it was a softer word than you think. What do I have to do with you? Barclay says Jesus was simply telling Mary to leave things to him, that he would have his own way in dealing with the situation. What do I have to do with you, or I'm going to handle this? But certainly it is connected to this next idea, which is my time has not yet come. Mary seems to be urging Jesus to make himself manifest to the world. At the very least, she wants him and knows he can solve this problem that's come up. And so she's urging him to do this. I think this is a really good commentary paragraph here. It's kind of wordy, but if you could follow along. This is concerning Mary's perspective. Remembering the many early sayings about him which she had treasured in her heart, and doubtless being informed of what had occurred at his baptism, which was a recent event, the proclamation of John the Baptist concerning him, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, seeing a group of disciples gathering around him and beginning to follow him and him teaching them, it is very reasonable for her, Mary, to expect him to do something which would reveal the high purposes for which he had been born. And although Mary was confused at times, we see throughout Jesus growing up as to what Jesus was saying, like when he said, I must be about my Father's business. But listen, this woman had received a visit from an angel and had conceived without a man a child. She knew there was a greater purpose for Jesus' life, and she had raised him and was living with him. And certainly Jesus would have been a perfect son. He would have been a son that would have revealed his higher calling, his higher purpose for what he was there, for why he was here. We see from this event that a primary outcome of Jesus manifesting his glory is the nurturing and the belief of his disciples. We're going to find as we look at John or any of the Gospels we could study, you're going to see that Jesus does things purposefully, and they are to nurture or to grow the disciples' faith. He's revealed himself. He's made himself manifest to his disciples. The crowd in general doesn't even know what happened, but the disciples and the servants know what's happened here. This was the beginning of the signs that Jesus did. He was done in Cana of Galilee. He manifests his glory, but notice the results. His disciples believed in him. This was about their faith development, about the nurturing of their faith and about their growth, because they were going to be responsible for carrying the gospel to the world, and this was the preparation of their faith. In the previous chapter, in John chapter 1, when Nathanael was called, Jesus said to him, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You shall see greater things than these. And certainly this is the beginning of those greater things that Nathanael was beginning to see. Secondly, as an idea, the miracle at Cana reveals Jesus' power. And you've heard this one many times before with regards to this. This is nothing new, but the miracle at Cana reveals Jesus' power over quality. Jesus didn't just barely produce wine. He produced a superb wine, a great wine, a high-quality wine, one that was created, it was so good and such quality that it stunned the host. The host had no idea that Jesus had created this wine from water, changed it. In fact, he says everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine, but you have kept the good wine until now. David gave me some information that was written by Jason Hart, his son-in-law, the 12 Days with Jesus, who's written on this event. The wine that was given first wasn't bad, but what Jesus provided was better. And now that the Messiah was in the picture, everything would be better. Even the good would be greater. So Jesus was going to revealed himself here, and each of the miracles is going to show Jesus' power over something. And many have suggested this is Jesus showing his power over quality or in his ability to produce. And certainly it's also was something created from or changed from something else. I think another interesting thing we're going to find as we study the book of John together is that John used his favorite word for miracle here, which is the word sign. So he doesn't say Jesus produced his first miracle here, but his first sign was given. What Jesus did was a sign that he really was from God. And by witnessing this sign, the disciples' faith in Jesus as the Messiah deepened as he was preparing them for their work. So that's the first part then. Number one, that Jesus manifests his glory at Cana. Surely had a profound effect upon his disciples as their faith was growing. Number two, Jesus manifests his zeal at the temple. As you know, the Passover was arguably the most sacred of feasts of the Hebrews. Faithful Jews made pilgrimages from all nations to celebrate this holy feast. Jerusalem would have been flooded with people coming from all nations. And as is the case by some in a lot of what we might call a tourist place, people will take advantage of people who come from out of town. And that's one of the things we find here, that even in the temple, as people were coming in to worship this high and noble purpose they've come, the money changers and people who were there, the leadership, the establishment saw it as a way to extort people and to rob them and to take advantage of them in the exchange of their currency for the currency that was local. So Jesus, his anger that he shows, and he definitely shows his anger, he makes a whip and drives people out and turns over tables and scatters money. We find that this indignation, this zealous anger, is kind of twofold. One is this taking advantage of people through dishonest exchange and fees. William Barclay writes that pilgrims were overcharged up to a day's wage in exchange fees and surcharges. By the time they exchanged this and they had to pay this fee and that one and a surcharge for that, it's kind of like trying to check out of a hotel, I guess, you know. You get all those extra things you didn't know you were going to be added to it. But this was a way that they were taking advantage of people in a way that was very dishonest. And then tied to this was the desecration of the temple. Imagine the Son of God who from all eternity was God, and the temple was built as a place for the worship of God. It was to be holy, and it was to have a sense of reverence connected to it. And for Jesus to go in and to see this commotion and the noise and the robbery and the animals and all this noise, and this was to be a place of worship and prayer and serenity. And instead it was made into this atmosphere that was not good. It was one that was of the hustle and bustle of the world. And so he made a scourge of cords and drove them out of the temple, the sheep and the oxen. He poured the coins over and turned over their tables. And to those who were selling the doves, he said, "Take these out of here. Stop making my Father's house a house of merchandise." Now, last Sunday night, we looked at the different ways that Jesus was described in chapter 1. Here we see that no one can dispute the fact that Jesus claimed to be the Son of God by reading this. He calls it his Father's house. So my Father's house is being made into a house of merchandise. A primary outcome then is similar to the Cana event or sign. Jesus manifests his zeal, And as he does so, he nurtures the belief of his disciples. It says in verse 17, the disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for thy house will consume me." This was something that they took notice of and later remembered it, and it was deepening to their faith. I would like to suggest to you that disrespect for the things of God ought to stir a zeal for righteousness in us. Should. And when you think of Jesus as he went in and he saw the disrespect and the irreverence that was there, the extortion, that same kind of zeal for the things of God ought to be something that's a part of who we are. If we see the things of God abused, if we see disrespect for God, for holy things, for His name that's used in vain around us all the time, that those things ought to bother us. It ought to kindle within us a certain amount of zeal. It should bother us when the things of God are maligned or disrespected. So I ask, are we stirred when the things of God are treated with irreverence and disrespect? Are we consumed with zeal for the things of God? Not only the things of God where God is disrespected, but for the purposes and high calling to which we've been called in Christ, for works of service, for being faithful to Him. Do those things, are they described as being things we are zealous about? Or are they simply just things maybe that we even dread or don't even do? In Romans chapter 12 and verse 11, Paul writes, "Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord." I'd like to explore some ideas with you on this verse. The King James Version says, "Not slothful in business, but fervent in spirit serving the Lord." The Revised Standard Version, "Never flag in zeal, be aglow with the Spirit, serve the Lord." The ESV, "Do not be slothful in zeal, be fervent in spirit, serving the Lord." And the NIV, "Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord." So all these different descriptions then, these translations, help us see this as something that involves energy and something that should drive us and be a part of who we are. This word fervent is actually the word for hot or boiling. Should be red hot, should be boiling hot in our faith, in our spirit. I think it's important to note that zeal is not merely emotionalism, but zeal is emotional. So we have to understand that a person who's zealous, that is emotional, even though our faith must be more than emotionalism. But it does have some energy behind it and some zeal with it. So how can we be more zealous? How can we be more zealous? Well, I've come up with a few suggestions, but there are more than these. One I didn't list here is simply a commitment to being more zealous. That in itself would be something that would help us in having more zeal. If we just made a commitment, I'm not going to be a tired, in a rut, uninvolved, backseater Christian. I'm going to have more zeal. The things of God are going to mean more to me. I'm going to be more active. I'm going to put myself forward for the things of God. That in itself would help and be good. But I'd like to suggest these. First, nearness to God kindles zeal. Nearness to Him. Notice Psalm 84 from the sons of Korah, from the Holman Christian Standard Bible. "How lovely is your dwelling place, Lord of hosts. I long and yearn for the courts of the Lord. My heart and flesh cry out to the living God. Even a sparrow finds a home, and a swallow a nest for herself, where she places her young. Yet your altars, Lord of hosts, my King and my God, how happy are those who reside in your house and who praise you continually." Now that sounds like zeal. That nearness to God, being close to Him, walking with Him, reading about Him in His Word, walking in step with the Spirit. Those things that endear us to God and closeness to Him will give us zeal, nearness to Him. A second idea I'd like to suggest to you is remembering what God has done will kindle zeal. One of the important purposes of partaking of the Lord's Supper, do this in remembrance of me. Don't forget. And so as we partake of the Lord's Supper each Sunday, it is a remembrance, and that remembrance of what God has done should give us zeal, should lift us up, it should set us back on course. He Himself bore our sins in His body on the tree that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By His wounds you have been healed. Passages like this, or when we turn into the pages of the gospel and read about the suffering of Christ and understand God's great love for us and the sacrifice that Jesus made for us and that God the Father made in watching His Son die and bear sin on the cross, all of those things should create zeal in us. And if the message of the cross has become a little too routine for us, shame on us. We need to read it afresh and to let it give us zeal. Number 3, I would like to suggest to you that service kindles zeal. When we're serving other people and we're more outward focused than inward focused, it's easier for us to get our feelings hurt when we're focused on ourselves. But we're more zealous for the things of God and for human beings when we're serving other people. If we take the focus off our own problems and onto the problems of others, or we look to others or serve others and be involved in serving, then it will give us more zeal. Really, the Romans 12 passage has this in the verse itself: not lagging behind in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. And maybe that's the best answer of all. When we're serving the Lord, we will have zeal. The last one I would like to suggest to you in this morning's lesson is that bringing others to Christ will kindle zeal. Maybe this is one we need to set as a New Year's resolution for us for this year. Be involved in bringing someone to Christ this year. Find someone you can study with, you can talk to. I found in my life that some of the most zealous moments in my life have been after teaching someone else the gospel. Not only does it force me, encourage me to study and grow myself, but it also is exciting to witness what God can do to someone else. Not anything that I've done, but something that Christ does in forgiving someone. Think about someone who has come from the depths of despair or from dark places in their lives because of sin, and they've obeyed the gospel and they've started out on a new course of life, and should just touch you right in your heart and mean something to you. Give you some zeal and excitement in your Christianity to know, isn't that great that God can do that? That He can take someone who's lost and can bring them to pure soul and wash away their sins. It's a great thing. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. In John chapter 4, which we haven't studied yet, but we will get to, I tell you, open your eyes and look at the field. They're ripe for harvest. And maybe our problem is that we have our eyes looking down at the ground or looking at ourselves, and we're not looking for opportunities. Maybe we're looking in places where the harvest isn't there, because sin is ugly, and sin is with people who have problems and burdens, and those are the people to whom maybe we need to look more and to understand how much they need Christ. I showed you this figure once before, but I've updated it a little bit. In 1995, the National and International Religion Report, which is pretty dated now, suggested that 33% of the world were Christian, and that was just in the anybody who claims anything connection with Christ at all, that 18% were Muslim, 17 were non-religious or atheist, and 13 were Hindu. Some more 2010 figures show that Christianity has remained the same, that Muslim has grown from 18% to 23%, non-religious to 18%, and Hindu 15%. What would you say, or what would you guess would be a percentage of the world population that are members of the Church of Christ? Would you think 1%? No, it's not 1%. How about 0.1%? That's not it either. 0.066% of the world's population. If we put that then on the other side, it would be 99.934%. Do you think we have something to do? How many missionaries are there that are members of the Church of Christ? You think we have 2,500 missionaries in the world? We don't. 2,000? No. 1,500? No. According to the best I could find out, we have about 1,100 missionaries, which is great, but you think about how can 1,100 missionaries teach the gospel to 6 or 7 billion people? How's that possible? 85 nations in the world have 0 missionaries. 0. That ought to make us zealous. It ought to make us think. Is God going to be pleased with us at our lack of zeal? Does God look at us and understanding the task at hand and saying, you people need to wake up. You're just a little too happy with the way things are. There are too many people who need the gospel in the world. If people in our town won't listen, then let's go to another town. If people in other towns won't listen, then let's go to other states. If other states won't listen, let's go to other countries. But let's not become content with where we are and what we're doing when there's so much to be done. We need to have zeal. And listen, when people start obeying the gospel, it will increase our zeal. So I wonder, are we consumed with zeal for the things of God? Does it bother us whenever people misuse God's name and when the things of God are insulted? But even a different question, are we consumed with zeal for the things of God? Tonight we will look at number 3. The hearts of men are made manifest to Jesus. I like this one too, and although it's just a few verses, we'll explore it pretty deeply tonight. Jesus manifests His glory, causes the disciples to believe. Jesus manifests His zeal. They understand that Jesus, this is important to Him. This is something that's a part of who He is, and then when people don't listen or were disrespectful to God, that it kindles something in Jesus that comes right out of His inner soul for the things of God. And tonight we're going to see how that the hearts of men are made manifest to Jesus. Jesus knows the hearts of men. It's a good thing and a concerning thing. We can't hide from Him. He knows what's in our hearts. Thank you for coming out today. I hope it's been a blessing for you to have been here. Let's be people who understand what God has done and let that rekindle in us a zeal for the things of God. If you'd like to respond this morning to become a Christian, to be immersed for the forgiveness of sins, or to confess any kind of sin, or even to say, I want to be more zealous, we'd love to witness that. If you'll stand and sing, we'll encourage you to come.